3 months ago, I was sitting in my cubicle at Henderson Financial Services, watching my colleagues frantically clicking through spreadsheets while I sipped my coffee and watched Netflix. They had no idea that what took them 8 hours to complete, I had automated to finish in 15 minutes. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was working smarter, not harder. I had no idea that my little secret would eventually bring down one of the largest financial firms in Chicago, cost them millions in losses, and land me in the middle of a corporate nightmare that would change everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is the story of how I accidentally became the most powerful person in a company that fired me. I started working at Henderson Financial Services in downtown Chicago right after graduating from Northwestern with a computer science degree. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid well enough to cover my student loans and rent for a decent apartment in Lincoln Park. The company specialized in processing insurance claims and financial audits for major corporations across the Midwest. My official title was Data Processing Specialist, which sounds fancy but really meant I spent my days copying numbers from one spreadsheet to another, running basic calculations, and generating reports that other people would review. The office was typical corporate America: gray cubicles, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of computers and printers. My supervisor, Janet Morrison, was a stern woman in her 50s who had been with the company for over 20 years. She ruled our department with an iron fist, constantly checking our work and setting unrealistic deadlines. Our team consisted of 12 people, all doing essentially the same mind-numbing tasks day after day. During my first week, I quickly realized that the work was incredibly repetitive. Every morning, we'd receive batches of insurance claims that needed to be processed. The process was always the same: open the claim file, extract specific data points, input them into our proprietary software system called ClaimFlow, run a series of calculations to determine payout amounts, cross-reference with policy databases, and generate final reports. A typical claim took about 30 minutes to process if everything went smoothly, but most of us could only complete about 12 to 15 claims per day due to various complications and the need for accuracy checks. The software we used was ancient, probably developed sometime in the early 2000s and never properly updated. It was slow, crashed frequently, and had one of the most unintuitive user interfaces I'd ever encountered. The company had been promising to upgrade their systems for years, but Janet always told us that the current system worked fine and there was no budget for improvements. After my second week, I started noticing patterns in the data processing. The calculations were always the same formulas applied to different numbers. The cross-referencing followed identical logic trees. Even the report generation used the same templates with minor variations. As someone who had spent 4 years learning programming and automation techniques, I couldn't help but see opportunities for improvement everywhere. I started small. During my lunch breaks, I began writing simple Python scripts to automate some of the more tedious calculations. At first, I was just experimenting, seeing if I could replicate the manual processes I was doing all day. I'd run my scripts on sample data and compare the results to what I got doing the work manually. The results were identical, but my scripts completed the work in seconds instead of minutes. The breakthrough came during my third week when I figured out how to interface with the ClaimFlow software directly. The system had an old API that most people didn't know existed, buried in documentation that nobody had looked at in years. Using this API, I could pull data directly from the system, process it with my scripts, and push the results back without ever touching the user interface. I spent several evenings at home perfecting my automation system. I created a master script that could handle the entire claim processing workflow from start to finish. It would scan for new claims, extract all relevant data, perform the necessary calculations, cross-reference with policy databases, and generate the final reports. What took me 30 minutes to do manually now took my script about 45 seconds. The first time I ran my complete automation system at work, I was terrified. I watched nervously as my script processed a batch of 20 claims in less than 15 minutes. I double-checked every calculation, verified every cross-reference, and reviewed every generated report. Everything was perfect. In fact, it was more accurate than when I did the work manually because there was no risk of human error in data entry or calculations. Initially, I was cautious about using my automation. I'd run it for a few claims each day, then spend the rest of my time pretending to work on other tasks. I'd click through random spreadsheets, make phone calls to verify information I already knew was correct, and generally try to look busy. Janet seemed satisfied with my productivity, which was now higher than most of my colleagues, and I felt like I had found the perfect balance. But as weeks passed, I became more confident in my system. I started automating larger batches of claims. sometimes processing my entire daily quota in the first hour of work. This left me with 7 hours to fill, which I initially spent reading programming blogs, taking online courses, and working on personal projects. I was essentially getting paid to advance my education while my computer did my job for me. The real game changer came when I realized I could schedule my scripts to run automatically. I set up a system that would start processing claims as soon as I logged into my computer each morning. By the time I finished my coffee and checked my emails, my daily work would be complete. I became incredibly efficient at looking busy. I'd have fake spreadsheets open, take notes during meetings about things I already knew, and even developed a technique for making strategic phone calls. That made me sound like I was dealing with complex problems. My colleagues started noticing my high productivity. Sarah Kim, who sat in the cubicle next to mine, often commented on how I always seemed to finish my work early. "You must have really good time management skills," she'd say, and I'd just smile and tell her I'd found some shortcuts. David Rodriguez, who had been with the company for 5 years, started asking me for tips on how to work faster. I gave him generic advice about organization and prioritization, but I never mentioned automation. Janet began holding me up as an example during team meetings. "Marcus has been consistently exceeding his targets," she'd announce. "I want everyone to look at what he's doing and figure out how to improve your own performance." These moments made me uncomfortable, but I enjoyed the recognition and the implicit job security that came with being a top performer. The automation system continued to evolve. I added error handling to deal with unusual cases, created logging systems to track what my scripts were doing, and even built in quality control checks that were more thorough than what most humans would do. I encrypted all of my code and stored it on a secure server I set up at home, accessible only through a complex decryption key that I had memorized. By my 3rd month at Henderson Financial Services, I was processing more claims than anyone else in the department while spending most of my workday learning new programming languages, reading books, and occasionally taking online courses with my headphones on. I had turned my cubicle into a personal learning environment where I was getting paid to expand my skills while my automated system handled the mundane work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using cutting-edge technology to work around a company that refused to modernize its systems. While my colleagues struggled with the clunky ClaimFlow interface, I had essentially built a modern wrapper around it that eliminated all the friction and inefficiency. I felt like I was living in the future while everyone else was stuck in the past. I started getting more ambitious with my automation. I created modules that could handle different types of claims, built predictive algorithms that could flag potentially fraudulent submissions, and even developed a system that could prioritize claims based on urgency and complexity. My scripts were becoming more sophisticated than the official company software, and they were producing better results with higher accuracy rates. The quality of my work was exceptional. I never missed deadlines, my error rate was essentially 0, and I was consistently processing 50% more claims than the department average. Janet started giving me more complex cases, assuming I had developed some kind of expertise in the field. In reality, I just kept improving my automation to handle whatever new challenges she threw at me. I began to feel invincible. I had solved the problem of boring, repetitive work through technology and creativity. I was earning a good salary while essentially getting paid to educate myself and work on personal projects. My colleagues respected me, my supervisor praised my work, and I felt like I had discovered the perfect life hack for corporate America. But I was also becoming increasingly isolated from my team. While they bonded over shared frustrations with difficult claims and complained about system crashes, I couldn't relate to their daily struggles. I felt like I was living a double life, presenting myself as a dedicated employee while secretly knowing that I hadn't actually done manual claim processing in months. The secrecy started to weigh on me. I wanted to share my breakthrough with someone, to get recognition for the technical achievement I had accomplished. But I also knew that revealing my automation would likely lead to complications. Would the company want to implement my system company-wide? Would they expect me to train others? Would they realize that my job could be eliminated entirely if they adopted my approach? I decided to keep my secret and continue enjoying the benefits of my automated workflow. I had no idea that this decision would soon put me at the center of a corporate crisis that would expose just how dependent Henderson Financial Services had become on systems they didn't understand, maintained by an employee they were about to fire. The comfortable routine I had established was about to be shattered in ways I never could have imagined, and the encryption key that protected my automated systems would become the most valuable piece of information in the entire company. 3 months into my automated paradise, everything began to unravel on a Tuesday morning in November. I arrived at the office to find Janet Morrison standing at my cubicle with a concerned expression and a thick manila folder in her hands. This was unusual. Janet typically stayed in her corner office until at least 10 a.m., and she never visited individual workstations unless something was seriously wrong. Marcus, we need to talk, she said, her voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. Conference room B, now. As I followed her down the hallway, my mind raced through possibilities. Has someone discovered my automation? Was there an issue with my work quality? I had been so careful to maintain appearances and ensure my output was flawless. The conference room felt smaller than usual as Janet closed the door behind us and spread several documents across the table. These are audit reports from the past 3 months, she began, pointing to charts and graphs that showed productivity metrics across our department. Your numbers are unusual. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off, I studied the documents, trying to maintain a neutral expression, while my heart pounded. The graphs clearly showed my productivity spike compared to my colleagues. While everyone else's output remained relatively consistent with minor fluctuations, my performance showed a dramatic improvement that coincided exactly with when I had started using my automation system. I've been working on improving my efficiency, I said carefully. I found some shortcuts in the workflow that help me process claims faster. Janet leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Marcus, you're processing claims 60% faster than our most experienced team members. David Rodriguez has been here for 5 years, and Sarah Kim is one of our top performers, yet you're outpacing both of them significantly. How exactly are you achieving these shortcuts? This was the moment I had been dreading. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead as I considered my options. I could come clean about the automation, but that might lead to questions about why I hadn't shared it with the team or reported it to management. I could try to explain it as improved manual techniques, but the data clearly showed performance levels that weren't humanly sustainable. I've been staying late to finish work and coming in early sometimes, I said, which was technically true even though I hadn't done manual claim processing in months. I also created some Excel macros to help with calculations. Janet's expression remained skeptical. Our system logs show you're not working significantly more hours than anyone else. And Excel macros wouldn't account for this level of improvement across all aspects of claim processing. She pulled out another document. A detailed breakdown of my work patterns over the past month. I realized with a growing alarm that the company's monitoring systems were more sophisticated than I had assumed. They had been tracking not just output but also login times, system usage patterns, and even keystroke frequency. There's something else, Janet continued. We've received some complaints from Meridian Insurance about inconsistencies in report formatting. Apparently, some of the reports you've submitted have subtle differences in structure and language compared to our standard templates. They're asking questions about whether we've changed our processing procedures. My stomach dropped. I had been so focused on accuracy and efficiency that I hadn't considered how my automated reports might differ stylistically from manually generated ones. My scripts used slightly different phrasing and formatting conventions, which I had assumed would go unnoticed. I can look into that, I said, trying to sound casual. Maybe I accidentally modified a template somewhere. Janet gathered the documents and stood up. Marcus, I want you to know that your productivity is impressive, and we value your contributions to the team. However, I need you to document your workflow improvements and share them with the department. If you've found legitimate ways to increase efficiency, we want everyone to benefit from them. Of course, I replied, knowing that I couldn't possibly document or share my actual methods. I'll put together a guide for the team. I want it on my desk by Friday, Janet said firmly. And in the meantime, I'm going to have Sarah shadow you for a few days to observe your techniques firsthand. This was a disaster. Having Sarah watch me work would immediately expose the fact that I wasn't actually processing claims manually. I nodded and agreed, but my mind was already racing through potential solutions. I needed to figure out how to either come clean about my automation or find a way to demonstrate fake manual work convincingly enough to fool a colleague. Over the next 2 days, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. I had to completely change my work routine, actually processing claims manually while Sarah observed. It was torture. Tasks that my scripts completed in seconds now took me the full 30 minutes they required everyone else. My productivity plummeted to normal human levels, which I tried to explain as having an off week due to stress. Sarah was thorough in her observations. She asked questions about every shortcut I claimed to use, wanted to see my Excel macros, and even requested copies of my templates. I had to frantically create fake macros that provided minimal efficiency improvements and pretend they were the source of my enhanced productivity. I don't understand, Marcus, Sarah said on Wednesday afternoon. These macros are helpful, but they wouldn't account for the kind of productivity gains Janet showed us in the reports. Are you sure there isn't something else you're doing differently? I Could see the suspicion in her eyes. Sarah was intelligent and experienced. She knew that what she was observing didn't match the performance data. I felt trapped between confessing to my automation and continuing a charade that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Thursday brought a new crisis. I arrived at work to find an email from our IT department asking me to schedule a meeting to discuss system optimization opportunities. Apparently, Janet had reached out to them about my claimed efficiency improvements, and they wanted to understand how I was achieving such high productivity within their existing infrastructure. The IT meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. The same day I was supposed to deliver my workflow documentation to Janet. I realized that I was running out of time and options. The web of deception I had built around my automation was collapsing, and I needed to make a decision about how to handle the situation. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my computer screen, weighing my choices. I could confess everything, and hope that the company would be impressed with my innovation rather than angry about my deception. I could try to maintain the lie and hope that somehow I could convince everyone that my performance was due to manual techniques. Or I could look for a new job and escape the situation entirely. The problem with confessing was that it would raise uncomfortable questions about why I had hidden my automation for months while accepting praise for productivity that wasn't actually mine. The company might view it as fraud or dishonesty, especially since I had been effectively stealing time by not doing the work I was paid to perform. The problem with maintaining the lie was that it was becoming impossible. Too many people were asking too many detailed questions, and the evidence against my story was mounting. I couldn't demonstrate the productivity gains I claimed to have achieved, and my fake explanations weren't satisfying anyone. Looking for a new job would solve my immediate problem but would mean abandoning the comfortable situation I had created for myself. I was making good money, had minimal actual work responsibilities, and was learning valuable skills on the company's dime. Starting over somewhere else would mean giving up all of those advantages. As I debated my options, I received a text message from Sarah. "Hey Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversations this week. Some things aren't adding up. We should probably talk before your meeting with IT tomorrow." I knew she had figured it out. Sarah was too experienced and observant to be fooled by my improvised explanations. She had probably already connected the dots and realized that my productivity claims were impossible to achieve through manual methods alone. Friday morning arrived with a sense of impending doom. I had prepared two different approaches: a full confession about my automation system, and a more limited admission that I had been using some unauthorized tools to help with my work. I wasn't sure which approach to take until I was actually sitting in the meeting room. The IT meeting included Janet, Sarah, and two members of the technology team, Robert Kim, the department manager, and Lisa Park, a systems analyst. They had prepared a detailed agenda focused on understanding my workflow improvements and potentially implementing them department-wide. "Marcus, we're excited to learn about the techniques you've developed," Robert began. "Productivity improvements of this magnitude could transform how we operate across the entire company. Can you walk us through your process?" I looked around the room at expectant faces and realized that the moment of truth had arrived. I could continue the deception and hope for the best, or I could come clean and face the consequences. The weight of months of secrecy suddenly felt overwhelming, and I made a decision that would change everything. "Before we start," I said slowly, "I need to be completely honest with you about what I've actually been doing." The room fell silent. Janet's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, while Sarah nodded slightly as if she had been expecting this moment. "I haven't been using manual shortcuts or Excel macros," I continued. "I've been using automated scripts to process claims. I wrote a Python program that interfaces with ClaimFlow and handles the entire workflow automatically." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Robert was the first to speak. "You mean you've been using unauthorized software to access our systems?" "Yes," I admitted. "I created a complete automation system that can process claims faster and more accurately than manual methods. It's been handling most of my workload for the past 3 months." Janet's face had gone pale. "Marcus, do you understand the implications of what you're telling us? You've been accessing company systems through unauthorized means, misrepresenting your work output, and essentially committing time theft for months." "I know it sounds bad," I said quickly, "but the results speak for themselves. My error rate is lower than anyone else's, I've never missed a deadline, and the quality of my work has been exceptional. The automation actually improves our service to clients." Lisa leaned forward with a concerned expression. "What kind of access does your system have to our databases? What security protocols did you bypass? This could be a massive compliance violation." I explained the technical details of my system, how I had discovered the API access, and the security measures I had implemented. I emphasized that I had been careful to maintain data integrity, and had actually improved the accuracy of claim processing, but as I spoke, I could see that my explanations were only making things worse. The IT team was focused on security risks and policy violations, while Janet was clearly angry about the deception and misrepresentation of productivity. "This is unacceptable," Janet said firmly. "You've violated company policy, compromised system security, and deceived your supervisors for months. I'm going to have to escalate this to HR and senior management immediately." The meeting ended with me being suspended pending a full investigation. I was escorted back to my desk to collect personal items while being watched by security. As I packed my few belongings, I could feel my colleagues staring and whispering. Word was already spreading that something serious had happened. Sarah approached. As I was leaving, "Marcus, I'm sorry it came to this. I suspected something was off, but I hoped you would trust me enough to explain what was really going on." "I know," I replied. "I should have been honest from the beginning. I just didn't know how to handle the situation once I was in too deep." As I walked out of the Henderson Financial Services building, I realized that my comfortable arrangement was over. The automation system that had given me months of easy work and professional recognition had ultimately led to my downfall. I had no idea that the real drama was just beginning, and that my encrypted automation system would soon become the center of a crisis that would shake the entire company. The HR meeting took place the following Monday morning in a sterile conference room on the 15th floor that I had never seen before. Present were Margaret Thompson from Human Resources, Janet Morrison, Robert Kim from IT, and surprisingly, Thomas Henderson himself, the CEO and founder of Henderson Financial Services. I had only seen him once before, during a company-wide meeting, and his presence made it clear that my situation had escalated far beyond a simple disciplinary matter. Margaret opened the meeting with a formal tone that left no doubt about the seriousness of the proceedings. "Marcus, we've completed our preliminary investigation into your unauthorized use of company systems. The violations we've identified include breach of information security protocols, misrepresentation of work performance, time theft, and potential exposure of client data to unsecured systems." Thomas Henderson sat quietly, studying a thick folder of documents while Margaret outlined the charges against me. His expression was unreadable, but I could sense his disappointment and anger. This was a man who had built his company on trust and reliability, and my actions had potentially compromised both. "The technical analysis shows that your scripts accessed our ClaimFlow database over 15,000 times without authorization," Robert added. "You bypassed multiple security layers and created backdoor access that could have been exploited by malicious actors. The compliance implications alone could result in regulatory fines exceeding $2 million. I sat in stunned silence as they detailed the full scope of what they considered my violations. What I had seen as innovative problem-solving, they viewed as systematic fraud and security breaches. The gap between my perspective and theirs felt insurmountable. However, Thomas Henderson spoke for the first time, his voice measured and thoughtful. "We cannot ignore the results your system produced. Your automation processed over 3,000 claims with a 99.7% accuracy rate, higher than our department average. Several major clients specifically praised the quality and consistency of reports that came from your work." This unexpected acknowledgement gave me a flicker of hope. Perhaps they could see past the policy violations to recognize the value of what I had created. "That doesn't excuse the deception and security violations," Margaret interjected quickly. "Company policy is clear about unauthorized software and misrepresentation of work activities." Thomas raised his hand to silence her. "I'm not suggesting we overlook the violations. But before we proceed with termination, I want to understand exactly what Marcus built and whether it has ongoing value for our operations." He turned to face me directly. "Marcus, I need you to explain your system in detail. How does it work? What would it take to implement it officially? And most importantly, can it be transferred to our IT department for proper integration?" This was my chance to salvage something from the disaster. I spent the next 45 minutes explaining my automation architecture, the algorithms I had developed, and the security measures I had implemented. I demonstrated how my system could handle edge cases that often caused problems for manual processors, and showed examples of the improved report quality that clients had noticed. "The system is modular," I explained. "It can be adapted to handle different types of claims, and it learns from processing patterns to improve accuracy over time. With proper integration into your official infrastructure, it could increase department productivity by 300% while reducing errors and improving client satisfaction." Robert was taking detailed notes and asking technical questions about database interactions and security protocols. Despite his earlier concerns about violations, I could see he was genuinely interested in the capabilities I had developed. What would prevent us from simply taking your code and implementing it ourselves? He asked. The system is encrypted with a 256-bit key that I created, I replied. Without the decryption key, the code is essentially unusable. Additionally, the algorithms include several proprietary innovations that aren't documented anywhere except in my personal notes. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Thomas Henderson's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Are you saying that your system cannot be accessed or replicated without your direct involvement? He asked. That's correct, I confirmed. I built it as a personal project with security measures to protect my intellectual property. The encryption and the undocumented algorithms make it impossible to reverse engineer. Margaret looked alarmed. This sounds like you're holding company data hostage with your unauthorized system. It's not holding anything hostage, I said defensively. The system doesn't contain any company data, it processes data from your existing databases and returns results through official channels. But the processing logic itself is protected. Thomas stood up and walked to the window, clearly thinking through the implications. Marcus, let me be direct with you. Your actions have put us in a difficult position. You've violated multiple company policies and created potential legal and regulatory risks. Normally, this would result in immediate termination and possible legal action. My heart sank as I waited for the inevitable conclusion. However, he continued, you've also created something that appears to have significant value for our business operations. The question is whether we can find a way to resolve this situation that addresses both the violations and the potential benefits. He returned to his seat and looked directly at me. I'm prepared to offer you a choice. We can proceed with standard disciplinary action, termination, possible legal consequences, and a negative reference that will make it difficult for you to find similar work in the industry. Or, we can explore an alternative arrangement. What kind of alternative? I asked cautiously. You would be terminated from your current position, but we would offer you a consulting contract to properly implement your automation system within our official infrastructure. The contract would include compensation for your intellectual property, but would also require you to transfer full ownership and control of the system to the company. Margaret looked surprised by this proposal. Thomas, I'm not sure this sets the right precedent for policy violations. Margaret, this isn't about precedent, he replied firmly. This is about what's best for the company and our clients. Marcus created something valuable, even if he did it the wrong way. We need to focus on capturing that value while addressing the legitimate concerns about his methods. Robert nodded in agreement. From a technical perspective, it would be much more efficient to work with Marcus to implement his system properly than to try to recreate it from scratch. The learning curve alone could take months, and we might never achieve the same level of sophistication. Thomas outlined the terms of the proposed consulting arrangement. I would receive a lump sum payment for transferring my intellectual property, plus hourly compensation for the implementation work. The total package was actually more generous than my annual salary had been. In exchange, I would provide complete documentation of my system, transfer all encryption keys, and work with their IT team to integrate the automation into their official infrastructure. There's one additional requirement, Thomas added. You would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing this situation with anyone outside the company. We can't have news of these security violations reaching our clients or regulators. I asked for time to consider the offer, which they granted until the end of the week. As I left the building, my mind was spinning with the unexpected turn of events. What had started as a disciplinary meeting had evolved into a negotiation for my intellectual property. Over the next few days, I consulted with an employment attorney to review the proposed consulting contract. She advised me that while the offer was generous, I should be aware that accepting it would essentially validate the company's claim to my work and limit my future options in the industry. The non-disclosure agreement is particularly restrictive, she explained. It would prevent you from using this experience as a case study or reference for future opportunities. You'd be giving up not just the code, but also your ability to discuss your innovation with potential future employers. I also had to consider the broader implications of accepting the deal. Was I setting a precedent that employees could violate company policies as long as they created something valuable? Or was I simply finding a pragmatic solution to a complicated situation? By Thursday, I had made my decision. The consulting offer provided financial security and allowed me to see my creation properly implemented, even if I wouldn't receive ongoing credit for it. The alternative, termination, potential legal action, and a damaged reputation, was far worse. I returned to Henderson Financial Services on Friday morning to accept their offer. The contract signing took place in the same conference room where I had confessed to my automation system just a week earlier. I want to be clear about expectations, Thomas said as we finalized the paperwork. This consulting arrangement is contingent on successful implementation of your system. If there are technical problems or if the results don't match what you've demonstrated, the contract can be terminated immediately. I understand, I replied. The system will perform exactly as I've described, assuming your IT team follows the implementation guidelines properly. Robert outlined the timeline for the project. We would begin with a comprehensive documentation phase, followed by system architecture design, testing in a sandbox environment, and finally full implementation across the department. The entire process was expected to take 6 to 8 weeks. As I signed the final documents, I reflected on the strange turn my career had taken. A week ago, I was a regular employee with a secret automation system. Now I was an external consultant being paid to implement the same system officially. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was essentially being rewarded for the same innovation that had gotten me fired. Margaret handed me a temporary contractor badge and a new set of security credentials. Your first day as a consultant begins Monday. You'll be working directly with Robert's team in a secure environment with limited access to production systems. Thomas shook my hand as the meeting concluded. Marcus, I want you to know that while I don't approve of how you went about this, I respect the ingenuity and technical skill you demonstrated. I hope this arrangement works out well for everyone involved. As I walked out of the building for what I thought would be the last time as a terminated employee, I had no idea that my real challenges were just beginning. The implementation project would reveal complexities I hadn't anticipated, and the company's dependence on my encrypted system would soon become more critical than anyone had realized. The comfortable routine of secretly automating my work had been replaced by the pressure of delivering a complex technical project under intense scrutiny. I was about to discover that building something in secret was far different from implementing it as an official business solution with stakeholders, deadlines, and corporate oversight. What I thought was the resolution of my situation was actually just the beginning of a much more complicated relationship with Henderson Financial Services, one that would test both my technical abilities and my capacity to navigate corporate politics under extraordinary circumstances. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected phone call that changed everything. At 6:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Robert Kim, and his voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on alert. Marcus, we have a serious problem. Can you get to the office immediately? Our entire claim processing system crashed over the weekend, and we're facing a crisis. I threw on clothes and drove downtown through the early morning traffic, my mind racing through possibilities. When I arrived at Henderson Financial Services, the building was buzzing with unusual activity for such an early hour. Employees were gathered in small groups, talking in hushed, worried tones, and I could see people working frantically at computers throughout the visible office floors. Robert met me at the security desk with a grim expression. The ClaimFlow system suffered a catastrophic failure Saturday night. We've lost access to our primary processing capabilities, and our backup systems are incompatible with current claim formats. We have over 8,000 pending claims that need to be processed, and our manual processing capacity can only handle about 200 per day. As he led me through the building, I could see the full scope of the crisis. Conference rooms had been converted into emergency processing centers where employees were attempting to handle claims using printed forms and calculators. Phone lines were ringing constantly with calls from frustrated clients demanding updates on their submissions. How does this relate to my consulting project? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Your automation system is the only processing capability we have that doesn't depend on ClaimFlow, Robert explained. We need to implement it immediately as an emergency backup solution, but we're running into problems accessing your encrypted code. We entered a secure conference room where I found Janet Morrison, Thomas Henderson, and 3 members of the IT emergency response team huddled around laptops and stacks of technical documentation. The stress in the room was palpable. Thomas looked up as we entered. Marcus, thank you for coming in so early. I need to be direct, we're facing a potential business extinction event. If we can't process claims within the next 72 hours, we'll be in breach of contract with every major client we have. Some of these contracts include penalties exceeding $10 million. He gestured to a wall-mounted monitor showing real-time client complaints and contract violation notices. Meridian Insurance alone is threatening to terminate their relationship with us if we don't provide status updates on 2,400 pending claims by Wednesday. They represent 30% of our annual revenue. The magnitude of the situation was staggering. Henderson Financial Services employed over 400 people across 3 office locations, and the ClaimFlow system failure threatened the entire operation. I realized that my little automation project had accidentally become critical infrastructure for the company's survival. We tried to access your system over the weekend, Robert continued, but we can't decrypt the core processing modules without your encryption key. Our cybersecurity team spent 36 hours attempting to break the encryption, but your security implementation is more sophisticated than they anticipated. I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. My encryption had been designed to protect my intellectual property, but I hadn't considered that it might one day hold a company hostage during an emergency. What exactly do you need from me? I asked. Janet spread out a timeline chart across the conference table. We need your system fully operational by tomorrow morning. Can you provide the decryption key and help us implement emergency processing capabilities tomorrow morning? I stared at the timeline in disbelief. We originally planned 6 to 8 weeks for proper implementation. You're talking about deploying a complex automation system in 24 hours. Thomas leaned forward with an expression of desperation I had never seen from a CEO. Marcus, I understand this isn't ideal, but we don't have alternatives. Our company's survival depends on getting claim processing restored immediately. What would it take to make this happen? I explained the technical challenges of rapid deployment. My system had been designed for my personal workstation with specific software configurations and security settings. Scaling it to handle the company's full processing load would require infrastructure modifications, load balancing, and extensive testing to ensure data integrity. The biggest risk is data corruption, I warned. My system was built for careful, controlled processing. If we rush the implementation without proper testing, we could damage client data or produce incorrect calculations that expose the company to legal liability. Robert nodded grimly. We understand the risks, but doing nothing guarantees business failure. Can you work with our team to implement emergency safeguards while we deploy your system? Over the next hour, we developed a crash implementation plan. I would provide the decryption key and work with their IT team to configure my automation for emergency deployment. We would start with a subset of the most critical claims, test the system thoroughly on those, and gradually expand capacity as we verified stability. The technical work began immediately. I sat with Robert's team in a secure development environment, walking them through my code architecture while they frantically took notes and asked clarification questions. The pressure was intense. Every hour of delay meant more client complaints and potential contract violations. This is incredibly sophisticated, commented Lisa Park as she reviewed my algorithms. The machine learning components and error handling are more advanced than anything we have in our official systems. How did you develop this level of complexity working alone? I explained my design philosophy and the iterative process I had used to refine the system over months of secret use. What had seemed like casual personal project work now revealed itself as enterprise-level software development that had accidentally created the company's most advanced technical capability. By Tuesday afternoon, we had successfully deployed a limited version of my system that could handle high-priority claims. The first test batch of 100 claims processed successfully in less than an hour, work that would have taken the manual processing team 2 full days. However, success bred new problems. Word of the rapid processing spread throughout the company, and departments began requesting priority status for their clients' claims. The demand quickly overwhelmed our limited deployment capacity. We're getting calls from executives at our biggest clients, Janet reported during an emergency status meeting. They've heard rumors that we have restored processing capabilities, and they want immediate updates on their pending claims. Thomas was fielding calls from board members and investors who were concerned about the company's stability. The market is starting to react to rumors about our system failure. Our stock price dropped 12% yesterday, and financial analysts are asking questions about our operational resilience. The pressure to expand the system deployment intensified, but I was discovering new technical challenges every hour. My automation had been designed for the specific claim types and processing volumes I had encountered during my normal work. Scaling it to handle the company's full diversity of claim types revealed edge cases and compatibility issues I hadn't anticipated. Claims from the healthcare division use completely different data structures, I explained to Robert during a late-night troubleshooting session. My system was optimized for property and casualty insurance, but medical claims require different calculation algorithms and regulatory compliance checks. We spent Tuesday night reconfiguring my algorithms to handle the broader range of claim types, but each modification introduced new potential failure points. The system that had worked flawlessly for my limited use case was struggling under the complexity of enterprise-wide deployment. Wednesday morning brought both relief and new crises. We had successfully processed over 3,000 claims overnight, bringing us back into compliance with several major client contracts. However, the rapid processing had revealed inconsistencies in our client data that had been masked by the slower manual processing methods. Your system is surfacing data quality issues that have been building up for months, Lisa reported. Client. Addresses that don't match policy records, calculation parameters that vary between different claim types, approval workflows that contradict each other. The manual processing teams had been working around these problems case by case, but automation requires consistent data structures. Thomas called an emergency meeting to address these discoveries. Marcus, your system isn't just processing claims. Faster, it's revealing fundamental problems with our data management and business processes. How extensive are these issues? I had spent the morning analyzing the data quality reports generated by my system. The scope of the problems was staggering. Approximately 30% of your client records have some form of data inconsistency. Your manual processors had been making judgment calls and corrections on the fly, but those corrections were never fed back into the master database. This revelation had serious implications beyond the immediate crisis. The company's data integrity problems represented years of accumulated errors that had been hidden by the flexibility of human processors. My automation system, with its requirement for consistent, clean data, was exposing the full scope of systemic issues that needed to be addressed. How long will it take to clean up the data? Janet asked. With manual correction methods, probably 6 to 8 months, I replied. But I could modify my system to include automated data cleaning capabilities. The machine learning algorithms could identify and correct many of the inconsistencies automatically. Robert looked skeptical. That sounds like we'd be making your system even more critical to our operations. What happens if we become completely dependent on your automation and then something goes wrong? This question highlighted the fundamental tension in our situation. My system had accidentally become essential infrastructure, but it was still essentially a personal project that hadn't been designed for enterprise reliability. The company was caught between immediate survival needs and long-term operational sustainability. Thomas made the decision that would define the next phase of our relationship. We're going to proceed with full implementation and data cleaning automation. Marcus, I'm authorizing emergency budget approval for whatever resources you need to make this system enterprise-ready. We can't go back to the old way of doing things. Your automation has revealed that our manual processes were fundamentally broken. As Wednesday evening approached, I realized that what had started as a consulting project to implement my personal automation had evolved into a complete transformation of the company's operational infrastructure. I was no longer just a fired employee helping with a technical transition. I had become the architect of Henderson Financial Services' digital future. The encryption key that had initially been leveraged in contract negotiations was now the cornerstone of the company's survival strategy. My secret project had accidentally positioned me as the most critical person in an organization that had fired me just weeks earlier, but with this newfound importance came unprecedented pressure and responsibility. The company's 400 employees, thousands of clients, and millions of dollars in contracts now depended on systems that only I fully understood. I was about to discover that being indispensable wasn't the advantage I had imagined it would be. 3 weeks after the emergency deployment, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined. My automation system was now processing 95% of Henderson Financial Services claims, and the company's operations had become entirely dependent on infrastructure that only I could maintain. What had started as a crisis response had evolved into a fundamental transformation of how the business operated, and I was sitting at the center of it all. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now had more influence over the company's direction than some of the senior executives. Every major operational decision required consideration of how it would interact with my automation system, and my technical recommendations carried weight that transcended my official consultant status. Thursday morning brought a meeting that would crystallize the new power dynamics. Thomas Henderson had called together the entire senior leadership team, including department heads I had never met before, to discuss the long-term implications of our automated processing capabilities. Our client satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs, announced Patricia Williams, the VP of Client Relations. Processing times are down 80%, error rates have virtually disappeared, and we're handling claim volumes that would have been impossible under the old system. Several major clients have specifically mentioned the improved quality and consistency of our service. David Chen, the Chief Financial Officer, presented even more striking numbers. The cost savings are extraordinary. We're processing 3 times more claims with 40% fewer staff hours. If we can maintain these efficiency levels, we're looking at a potential 60% increase in annual profit margins. These results had attracted attention beyond the company. Industry publications were writing articles about Henderson Financial Services' mysterious productivity breakthrough, and competitors were trying to understand how we had achieved such dramatic improvements seemingly overnight. The challenge, Thomas said, turning to look directly at me, is that our entire operation now depends on Marcus's system. We need to discuss how to manage this dependency and ensure business continuity. Robert Kim had prepared a detailed technical assessment that painted a stark picture of our situation. Marcus's automation system has become more complex and sophisticated than our original claim flow infrastructure. It's handling data integration, quality control, regulatory compliance, and client communication workflows that extend far beyond basic claim processing. He displayed a network diagram showing how my system had grown to interface with 17 different company databases and external services. What had started as a simple automation tool had evolved into the central nervous system of the entire organization. The system processes over 2,000 claims per day and manages data workflows for departments including underwriting, customer service, compliance, and financial reporting, Robert continued. If it goes down, we don't just lose claim processing capability, we lose core business functionality across multiple divisions. Margaret Thompson from HR raised the obvious concern. This level of dependency on a single consultant represents an unacceptable business risk. What happens if Marcus becomes unavailable? What if he decides to terminate his contract? What if there's a technical failure that only he can resolve? The room fell silent as everyone contemplated these scenarios. I realized that my encryption key and specialized knowledge had evolved from a negotiating tool into something approaching a hostage situation, except I had never intended to create leverage over the company. I want to address those concerns directly, I said, speaking up for the first time during the meeting. I never intended to create a dependency situation, and I understand the business risks involved. I'm willing to work with your team to develop redundancy and knowledge transfer protocols. Thomas nodded appreciatively, but his expression remained serious. Marcus, we value your willingness to collaborate, but we need more than good intentions. We need concrete plans for reducing our operational dependence on your unique knowledge. Over the following days, we developed a comprehensive knowledge transfer and redundancy strategy. I would work with Robert's IT team to fully document my system architecture, create detailed operational procedures, and train multiple team members on maintenance and troubleshooting protocols. However, implementing this plan proved more challenging than anyone anticipated. My automation system had evolved organically over months of refinement, and many of its most critical capabilities existed only in my understanding of the business logic and edge cases. The machine learning algorithms adapt their behavior based on historical patterns that only Marcus recognizes, Lisa Park explained during a technical review meeting. We can document the code, but replicating his decision-making process for handling unusual cases would require months of supervised training. More problematically, my system's integration with the company's various databases had required numerous custom solutions and workarounds that weren't immediately obvious from the code alone. During knowledge transfer sessions, I kept discovering assumptions and shortcuts I had built into the system that would be difficult for others to understand or maintain. Here's an example, I explained while walking Robert through a particularly complex algorithm. The system automatically adjusts calculation parameters based on claim submission dates because I noticed that policies issued before 2019 use different depreciation schedules. That business rule isn't documented anywhere in the official policy manuals. I learned it by processing thousands of claims and recognizing the pattern. These discoveries highlighted a fundamental problem. My automation system contained institutional knowledge that existed nowhere else in the company. Years of manual processing experience had been encoded into algorithms that were more sophisticated than the official business rules documentation. The knowledge transfer process was revealing gaps in the company's formal procedures and policies that had been bridged by the collective experience of long-term employees. My system had accidentally captured and automated tribal knowledge that wasn't written down anywhere. This is actually a broader problem than just Marcus's system, acknowledged Janet during a department review meeting. Our manual processing teams have been making hundreds of small judgment calls that aren't reflected in our official procedures. When we lose experienced employees, we lose knowledge about how to handle edge cases and unusual situations. Thomas recognized the strategic implications of this discovery. Marcus's automation doesn't just process claims faster, it preserves and systematizes institutional knowledge that we've been losing through employee turnover. This may be more valuable than the efficiency improvements alone. This realization led to an unexpected expansion of my consulting role. Instead of just transferring knowledge about my existing system, I was now being asked to work with different departments to capture and automate their institutional knowledge before it was lost. We want you to interview our most experienced processors and encode their decision-making logic into automated systems, Thomas explained during a contract renegotiation meeting. Your approach to automating complex business logic could be applied across multiple departments and business functions. The scope of this expanded project was staggering. I would essentially be tasked with reverse engineering the company's operational knowledge and creating automated systems that could replicate the expertise of employees with decades of experience. The timeline for this kind of comprehensive automation would be at least 18 months, I cautioned. And it would require deep collaboration with employees who might see automation as a threat to their job security. Margaret raised another concern: this level of automation could lead to significant workforce reductions. We need to consider the ethical and practical implications of replacing human expertise with automated systems. Thomas was grappling with competing priorities. The success of my automation had demonstrated the potential for dramatic efficiency improvements, but it had also revealed the complexity and risks of becoming dependent on automated systems that few people understood. I want to propose a different approach, I suggested. Instead of replacing human expertise with automation, we could use automation to augment human capabilities. The systems could handle routine processing while flagging complex cases for human review, and they could provide decision support tools that help less experienced employees make better choices. This hybrid approach appealed to Thomas because it addressed both efficiency and knowledge preservation goals without creating the workforce displacement concerns that full automation would generate. We could create a tiered automation system, I continued. Routine cases get fully automated processing, complex cases get automated analysis with human oversight, and truly unusual situations get escalated to senior staff with automated research and recommendation tools. Robert was intrigued by the technical possibilities. This would actually be more sophisticated than pure automation because it would require the system to evaluate case complexity and route decisions appropriately. It would need to understand not just how to process claims, but how to assess what level of human involvement each case requires. The meeting concluded with approval for a pilot program to develop this augmented processing approach in one department. If successful, it would be expanded company-wide over the following year. As I left the building that evening, I reflected on how completely my relationship with Henderson Financial Services had changed. I had gone from a secret automation user to a fired employee to an emergency consultant to a strategic technology advisor responsible for reshaping the company's entire operational approach. The encryption key that had initially been my protection against corporate exploitation had evolved into the foundation of a partnership that was transforming how the company thought about technology, efficiency, and knowledge management, but I was also beginning to understand the weight of responsibility that came with this influence. Hundreds of employees' livelihoods depended on decisions I was helping to make about automation and workforce evolution. Thousands of clients relied on systems that I had designed and maintained. The company's financial future was tied to technology. Strategies that I was architecting, what had started as a personal project to avoid boring work, had become a case study in how individual innovation could reshape entire organizations. I was no longer just someone who had automated his job, I had become someone who was automating an entire industry's approach to complex business processes. The question was whether I was prepared for the long-term implications of the power I had accidentally accumulated, and whether Henderson Financial Services was ready to navigate the fundamental changes that my automation was bringing to their business model. 6 months after my termination, I found myself sitting in the executive boardroom of Henderson Financial Services as the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer. The mahogany table that had once seemed intimidating now felt familiar, and the view of Chicago's skyline from the 42nd floor reminded me daily of how dramatically my circumstances had changed. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Following the success of our augmented processing pilot program, Thomas Henderson had approached me with an offer that redefined our entire relationship. Instead of remaining an external consultant with specialized knowledge, he wanted me to join the leadership team and spearhead the company's evolution into a technology-driven industry leader. Marcus, what you've accomplished goes far beyond automating claim processing, Thomas had said during our negotiation meeting. You've shown us a completely different way of thinking about business operations, efficiency, and the role of technology in preserving and enhancing human expertise. The CTO position came with equity in the company, a substantial salary increase, and most importantly, the authority to implement technological innovations across all business units. My encryption key, which had once been leverage in a desperate negotiation, was now just one component of an extensive technology infrastructure that I was responsible for architecting. The pilot program results had exceeded everyone's expectations. The hybrid automation approach we had developed processed routine claims with 99.8% accuracy while successfully identifying complex cases that required human expertise. Employee satisfaction had actually increased because staff were no longer spending time on repetitive tasks and could focus on challenging, high-value work that utilized their professional judgment. We're seeing productivity improvements of 400% in routine processing, but more importantly, our complex case resolution quality has improved by 25%, reported Jennifer Walsh, who had been promoted to Director of Automated Operations. The system's ability to flag unusual patterns and provide research support is making our experienced processors even more effective. The success attracted attention from industry leaders and technology companies. Representatives from major consulting firms were reaching out to understand our automation methodology, and software companies were interested in licensing our hybrid processing algorithms. We've received acquisition offers from 3 different financial technology firms, David Chen informed the board during our quarterly review. They're specifically interested in our automated processing capabilities and the institutional knowledge capture methodologies that Marcus developed. However, Thomas had made it clear that he had no intention of selling the technology or the company. What we've built here represents a competitive advantage that will define our industry position for the next decade. We're not just processing claims more efficiently, we're fundamentally changing how financial services companies can operate. My role as CTO involved challenges I hadn't anticipated when I was secretly automating my cubicle work. I was now responsible for managing a technology team of 35 people, overseeing integration projects with external partners, and developing long-term strategic plans for digital transformation across multiple business units. The most complex project involved expanding our automation approach to the underwriting department, where senior analysts evaluated risk assessments for large commercial policies. Unlike claim processing, underwriting required subjective judgment about risk factors that couldn't be easily quantified or automated. The challenge with underwriting automation is that much of the expertise involves reading between the lines, explained Patricia Morgan, the department's senior underwriter with 23 years of experience. We look at financial statements, site inspections, and market conditions, but we also consider factors like management credibility and industry trends that aren't captured in formal data. I spent weeks shadowing Patricia and her team, learning to understand the subtle indicators and intuitive assessments that informed their decisions. The goal wasn't to replace their expertise with automation, but to create tools that could enhance their analysis and help them identify patterns they might otherwise miss. The system could analyze thousands of similar cases and highlight correlations between risk factors and claim outcomes, I explained during a design meeting. It wouldn't make underwriting decisions, but it could provide data-driven insights that support human judgment. This approach required developing machine learning algorithms that could process unstructured data like site inspection reports, management interviews, and market research documents. The technical complexity was significantly greater than my original claim processing automation, but the potential impact was also much larger. 3 months into the underwriting project, we achieved our first major breakthrough. The system successfully identified a pattern of elevated risk in warehouse policies located in specific geographic regions that human underwriters had missed. Further investigation revealed that these areas had experienced subtle increases in crime rates that weren't reflected in standard risk assessment databases. This is exactly the kind of insight we hoped the technology could provide, Patricia acknowledged. We would never have connected those dots manually because the data points came from different sources and the correlation wasn't obvious without systematic analysis. The success of our underwriting tools led to requests from other departments for similar automation support. The legal team wanted document analysis capabilities for contract reviews. The customer service department requested automated sentiment analysis to identify at-risk client relationships. The finance team needed automated anomaly detection for fraud prevention. Each new project revealed different aspects of institutional knowledge that could be captured and systematized. I was essentially reverse engineering decades of professional expertise and finding ways to augment human capabilities with technological tools. We're creating a new category of business software, observed Michael Torres, a technology analyst who had been following our progress. Instead of replacing human workers with automation, you're building systems that make human expertise more powerful and accessible. The broader implications of our approach were attracting attention beyond the financial services industry. Manufacturing companies wanted to apply our knowledge capture methodologies to preserve retiring engineers' expertise. Healthcare organizations were interested in our pattern recognition capabilities for diagnostic support. Educational institutions saw potential applications in personalized learning systems. Thomas had started receiving invitations to speak at technology conferences about our human-augmented automation approach. The company was becoming known as an innovation leader, which helped attract top talent and high-value clients who wanted to work with a forward-thinking organization. Our brand has evolved from reliable claim processor to technology innovation leader, noted our new VP of Marketing, Rachel Kim. Clients are choosing us not just because we're efficient, but because they want to be associated with cutting-edge business practices. This reputation transformation had financial implications. Beyond operational efficiency, Henderson Financial Services valuation had increased by 300% as investors recognized the potential of our technology platform. We were no longer just a regional financial services company, we were a technology company that happened to operate. In financial services, the personal transformation was equally dramatic. I had gone from being a recent graduate doing repetitive data entry to becoming a recognized expert in business automation and artificial intelligence. Speaking invitations, consulting offers, and job opportunities arrived regularly, but I had found something at Henderson that was more valuable than any external opportunity. "You've created something here that didn't exist before," Thomas told me during my annual review. "The combination of technical innovation and business insight you've developed isn't something you could replicate by starting over somewhere else." He was right. The automation systems I had built were deeply integrated with Henderson's specific business processes, client relationships, and institutional knowledge. The technology was valuable, but its real power came from the context and relationships that had shaped its development. More importantly, I had discovered that the most satisfying work wasn't automating away boring tasks, but finding ways to enhance human capabilities and solve complex problems that required both technological sophistication and business understanding. The irony of my journey wasn't lost on me. I had started by trying to avoid work, but had ended up creating more meaningful and challenging work than I could have imagined. The encryption key that had once protected my secret automation was now just one component of a technology platform that was transforming an entire industry. Looking back, getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to my career. If I had never been caught, I would have remained a secret automation user, getting paid to watch Netflix while my scripts did simple data processing. Instead, the crisis had forced me to think bigger about the potential applications of automation and the value of preserving human expertise. The cubicle where I had once sat watching my colleagues struggle with tedious tasks was now occupied by Jennifer Walsh, who used advanced analytical tools to identify process improvements and oversee automated workflows that I had never imagined when I was just trying to avoid boring work. My automation had evolved from a personal productivity hack into a business transformation platform that was changing how an entire company operated. The technology that had gotten me fired had ultimately made me indispensable, but more importantly, it had shown me that the real potential of automation wasn't replacing human work, it was making human work more valuable, more interesting, and more impactful. 6 months ago, I thought I was clever for automating my job. Now I understood that I had accidentally discovered something much more important, a way to use technology to amplify human potential rather than replace it. That insight had become the foundation of a career that was more rewarding than anything I had originally planned. The encryption key that had started this whole journey was still protecting critical systems, but it was no longer a secret or a source of leverage. It was simply one component of an infrastructure that hundreds of people depended on, thousands of clients benefited from, and an entire industry was beginning to adopt. Sometimes the best career moves are the ones you never intended to make. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.